Good evening, everyone. I am Sammamish Mayor Christy Malchow. I appreciate you all being here this evening for this very important event. As a parent and as a community member, this has been somewhat of a somber time for our community relative to drug use and teens. So I appreciate that you all find this topic to be of interest. And because we're on a Thursday evening, we do have the city recording this event, so it will be able to be played back for those that are unable to attend, so that is a great thing. Please share that with your friends and neighbors. We've structured this presentation this evening to try and address the many questions that the city and the police have heard over the past few weeks. And while we will not be doing a Q&A session up here, we have given you the opportunity to ask the city questions. There is a box right over here. It is a white box. And there are these forms right over there by the box. And you can leave questions here. And what the city will do with those is do a Q&A or a frequently asked questions section on the city's website, which is sammamish.us. This evening, we are very lucky to have a knowledgeable group of speakers here with us this evening to provide you with some of the following: an overview of the teen drug use here in Sammamish, insights into what police are seeing on the streets, a medical perspective on the impacts of the substance abuse, and advice on what parents can do. I'd like to thank all the agencies and organizations that are here. They are on the outskirts here, and many of you may have visited them. I would point to the hidden in plain sight there in the corner. If you are a parent and you want to get an inside view as to what drugs might look like in your child's bedroom, I highly recommend walking over there, and that is presented by Influence the Choice. We know that this evening is not going to solve the problem that we have here in our community. It is not exclusive to our community. Certainly it is a regional problem, a state problem, and a national problem. But we are taking the first steps in order to start the conversation so that we can find a remedy for it. With that, I would like to introduce you to Jerry Blackburn. He is the Executive Director of Influence the Choice.
Good to see you. I'll just set my water over here. Did you have a chance to go through the room? Yeah? Sorry, it's a little bit overwhelming, I know. The room is really meant to be an exaggeration. So when you're thinking about signs, symptoms, concerns, red flags, whatever terminology you want to use, the room really exaggerates all of those. But as a parent, like Christy said, as a parent, if something doesn't align, right, it doesn't make sense, then your spider senses should be up. And then find out what's missing. And then if it turns out to be an accurate, logical progression, then you were wrong, and that's awesome, right? But just being capable of parenting from that standpoint, right? Just being aware of things. We're busy, it's hard. I have a 14-year-old, I can't go into her room. It's horrible, right? I find myself texting her from the living room, do your homework, please, right? And so I get it. And I can't do that. I need to be in a room, I need to be around, I need to be part of her life, I need to be participating and watching and managing and monitoring. And so don't be overly worried about the stuff in the room because it is an exaggeration. And we were happy to bring it up and set it up for you. So Influence of Choice is an organization that works in prevention. We're a community coalition that uses the data that we'll talk about to create action items in our community and then start to elicit change. And I love what Christy said, this isn't going to change stuff. Us coming to this event is not going to change stuff. What will is you taking the information that you have and then doing something in the community proactively. So that's my call to action for you. Get involved in as many community organizations and mechanisms that support young people, and then we'll move the needle. We'll change the statistics. But let's take a look at those. My organization had the opportunity to have an event recently called the Action Forum for Youth, where we combined some of the Lake Washington School District data and some of Issaquah data to represent the Sammamish area. And this is available on our website if you want the complete presentation. The Healthy Youth Survey is administered every 2 years to 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. It's unbelievably reliable and valid. There's lots of mechanisms to make sure that the data that's being collected is accurate. And we use it for a host of things. It's administered to 230,000 students throughout the state. So we love the Healthy Youth Survey. In terms of representations, those are the numbers that we collected. The numbers tonight, I just need a caveat. For the 12th graders is aggregate data for the entire school districts. One of our 12th grade class didn't have a number high enough to be reliable and projecting, and so we can't report that data, so we just combine the full school district. So it's a little bit different. One of the coolest things you think about prevention, when you think about the Sammamish area, the majority of the Sammamish students are not white. So if we're thinking about engaging preventative strategies, they need to be culturally responsive. So I think that that's a really important caveat that we start to think about in terms of working in our area. When we look at levels of anxiety, it's no secret that our young people are experiencing unbelievable amounts of anxiety. We've created an ambitious set of individuals who are really striving to reach just unbelievable places in terms of what they have the capacity to do, but it's at a cost. Our young people are consistently spinning in a place where they're trying to win versus be successful. And so we're seeing the difficulties that they're experiencing with that in maladaptive patterns of behavior, whether it be self-harm, looking for relief in terms of this level of anxiety in terms of substances, or turning to substance use to be able to manage the difficult caseload that they might have. Right? If they're taking an unbelievable amount of classes, they might look to stimulants to help them be successful. Looking at substance use in our community in terms of 30-day use. 30-day use is indicative of consistent use. Obviously, and how many parents were kind of caught off guard by all the electronic nicotine delivery products in the room, right? Like a lot of them, different kinds. We're well aware that the use of electronic nicotine delivery systems have increased significantly. This is used at school, so that's aggregate use. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. There we go. So when we're looking at 30-day use, huge numbers of young people, this is our 12th graders, 27% report using electronic nicotine delivery systems on a consistent basis. As communities in prevention, we work so hard with traditional tobacco, getting it down to less than 1 or 2%. And now we're right back in this place where young people are addicted to nicotine. Alcohol, obviously, is always a concerning reality for our young people, as is marijuana. Those are usually going to be your top three. Statistically, the one thing that I also want to throw out as a caveat is to think about this from a positive community norm standpoint as well, is that the majority of our young people don't use substances. Like, we're doing a good job. We can certainly change these numbers, but the majority of young people don't use substances. The difficulty for prevention people is the majority of kids think that more kids are using than actually do, and they think parents care less than you actually do, which makes my job really difficult. Interesting, not difficult, right? So what can we do to change that dynamic? How can we make sure that kids understand that the majority of people aren't using substances? How can we make sure that parents are consistently talking to their young people about their expectations? And as we go forward, other people are going to talk about those preventative factors. Again, looking at use at school, those orange lines are young people using electronic nicotine delivery systems while at school. And so we're experiencing lots of kids who are uncomfortable using the restrooms anymore because tons of kids are using vaporizers between classes. And so they're going to the bathroom in the gymnasium because it's monitored. those dynamics need to change. So what can we do? How can we help? Myself and Christy and Sarah, who are behavioral health counselors, we're limited because that diagnosis in and of itself can't be managed in the same insurance-based systems that we have. So we have huge numbers of young people addicted to nicotine, and we don't have a lot of systems to help care for them in terms of traditional behavioral health services. So we need to work as a community to try to figure that out. Some of the things that also comes up, and again, other folks are going to talk about the protective factors and risk factors, but thinking about how we can move the needle, there are internal things that we work in terms of perceptions, like we just talked about, and at the same time, there's external factors, making sure that young people have connections in their community, making sure that young people are productive and have an opportunity to give back and do things in their community to feel good about themselves. Our young people, as we saw in terms of the levels of anxiety, are consistently evaluating themselves externally. Does that make sense? Like all of their self-worth is on the things that other people are putting on them, right? The grades and the soccer scores and this, and it's not internal. So they consistently struggle trying to figure out how to be who they are when they constantly have to get those from outside external sources. And that's really a changed dynamic over the last 15 years. How do we get back to a place where kids are investing in their community? I always laugh. My daughter last year in 7th grade, she got classroom credits for doing community service. Like, think about that for a minute. Like, if you're getting credit for community service, it's not community service. It's a job, right? And so it's like, how did we get there? How do we change those dynamics? How do our young people invest in things that they don't need to have rewards except the things that are internal? Because doing things for other people really fills up your heart, right? It makes you a gracious person in your community. So we can change those dynamics as well. Looking at, again, attitudes for substance use, as an individual who works with statistics on a consistent basis, we're used to seeing the stair step, right? Either kids get better at things or they change their attitudes. And as our young people get older, we stop having conversations with them and they change their attitudes about substance abuse in the community. They really think differently about it. And so how can we continue to have those conversations? How can we have those dinner times together and really make that a hallmark of our relationships? Thinking about, again, their attitudes. We do pretty well in terms of parents sharing perspectives. But again, as kids get older, their attitudes start to change in terms of what they think you believe. So you have a lot of power in terms of changing those statistics and changing those dynamics. Thinking about what their attitudes are in terms of peer use as well, right? How wrong do you feel it is for your friends to use the following? And again, we have that natural stair stepper. We do really well with the younger ages, right? We help kids start to think about each other in terms of their community, but we lose the idea of real friendships. Like if your friend is struggling or participating in a concerning activity, like our models should allow them to say, hey, I need to talk to your parents because I'm worried about you, because I care. And we've lost those kinds of perspectives, right? Kids really feel uncomfortable with that. The other thing is, and it seems unusual, you think that since their prefrontal cortex is developing as they get older, no, it's not. You would imagine that as they get older, they have a different perspective in terms of substance use in the community. But it's actually the opposite. As young people get older, right, you can see here with our 12th graders, 38% of them would be comfortable accepting a drink. They lose the skill sets that we helped them develop when they were younger. And so we have to change our dynamic and our model for that, helping older kids have the capability of saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this, right? It's not something that I want to engage in. When we were younger, we had peer pressure, right? Which didn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. But now the idea is really peer influences, people around me. And I think about it also as social proximity. Like if I'm with a group of individuals who are constantly using a substance, I'm just now more comfortable with that dynamic socially, psychologically. And so I'm going to tend to lean towards that. So how can we change those dynamics? What can we do in the community to give young people the skills to stand up to their friends? Remember in Harry Potter when Neville stood up to Harry and Ron because they were going to go out again? Like that's like one of my favorite scenes, although he gets frozen and loses, but he gets points in the end because he actually stood up and cared for his friends enough to say, that's not okay. That's a wonderful thing to be able to do. To be that good of a friend, to have that much concern, pretty cool. And we can do that. Thinking about community access, our young people, again, consistently change their perspectives and have increased access to substances, whether it be in the house. We talk about making sure our medications are locked up. We live in a state that has legalized retail use of marijuana. Are we keeping that locked up if we are an individual who chooses to do that? Is alcohol being monitored within the house? Because the same dynamics are true when we were kids, right? Alcohol in a liquor cabinet has a tendency to make its way out or gets water added to it. None of those things have changed. Thinking about support, and I think this is really important when we think about our dynamics and what we can do in prevention, is that young people really lean towards peers more than anything in terms of their needs from a social support standpoint. Yet it's really hard in school systems and in other community dynamics to create cohesive collections of young people who are in spaces where they can really explore difficult subject matter, right? It's uncomfortable. And so we kind of separate them. We keep them in their little silos. We don't talk about suicide within schools all that much because it's hard and we don't know exactly how to go about it, right? We do education, but the dynamics that we've created make it kind of difficult for young people to be in support systems. And there are school systems and models that do that differently. The other one, obviously, you can see is parents and guardians. You stay up there in terms of high percentages. You have an impact. Our young people listen to you, right? Parental expectations and parental boundaries are one of the biggest protective factors for young people in terms of their substance use choices. They listen to you. They don't. They pretend they don't, right? Again, I have my 14-year-old. She's not listening to me right now, right? I'm sure she's at home not doing her homework. I can be pretty certain of that, right? But when you look at the top two, the other thing to think about when Chrissy was talking about it, and our other folks will mirror that, this is a community issue. It is not a school district issue. It is not a police issue. Right? If you look at the levels of support that young people access within the school system, right, it's pretty limited. That's not a place where they're looking for their supports. It's great that we have 10% of those folks doing that, but we really need to do this as a community. It's super important. Super important. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. Visit our table, get stuff for our social media platforms, and hopefully we can help make a difference going forward. I have 18 seconds, and I don't have an 18-second joke. I don't. Should I introduce Michelle? Can I introduce Michelle? She's my buddy. Where is she? Is she sneaking up? Is she all the way over there? Well, you have to come up here. Michelle Bennett is still our police chief. How cool is that? And Eric Garland, sorry, detective. I don't have to read.
Hello. When he says still our police chief, that made me worried. It's not like I'm getting thrown out. Or maybe I am. I'd like to briefly introduce Eric Gagnon. He's a detective with the King County Sheriff's Office, and he's in our special emphasis team, which deals with illicit substances. So he's going to start, and then I will finish.
Hello, thank you all for being here tonight. Following that presentation, I want to talk about one specific thing that he mentioned, and that is the culture that we have towards substances. We have made a culture where if I was to take out a pack of smokes right now, and some of you have heard this, and light went up, everybody, there's the door, get out. In fact, I can't even go smoke 25 feet next to the door. Because we have scientific evidence that has changed our culture to say that smoking is bad for you. And it's the same thing with all of the rest of the narcotics that I deal with on a daily basis. We have to change the culture so that when somebody is using in our home, our church group, our work group, that we have the guts to stand up and say, get out. We have help for you, but we can't have this in our group. And then backing off from that, there are many, many drugs out there. Tons and tons of drugs. Drug dealing is capitalism. It's a law of supply and demand. And the way that we change that is we change, number one, what I just said, we change our culture, which is one end of the chain. And on the other side of the chain, we use enforcement to attempt to stem the flow of those drugs into our communities. Now, I'm not saying a war on drugs. I'm saying we have a personal responsibility to tell people we cannot have that in our community when they see it happening, and come to the police. And with police investigations, we need the community's help. When we want to go serve a search warrant on somebody's home, we have to have a probable cause affidavit that has been sworn in court and signed by a superior court judge. I cannot back that up on anonymous statements from people. Law enforcement needs the community to step up and say, this is what I saw, and I will put my name on that statement. So I'm going to back even a little bit farther away and just talk about one specific drug that unfortunately the entire nation is struggling with right now, and we here in Sammamish have lost 2 of our own. And that is fentanyl. I'm going to go over the fentanyl facts. I want this just to be an informational session for kids and parents so that they understand how deadly this stuff is and where it's showing up in our drug chain. Lots of words. Basically, the very top, it's a synthetic opioid that's 80 to 100 times stronger than morphine, and it was first developed for end-of-life sedatives and post-operational anesthesia. I mean, that's a very, very powerful opioid that has now made it out into the streets. It appears in powder form, and when we see it out in the street as a law enforcement officer, I cannot look at that and tell you that it's fentanyl. It's virtually indistinguishable to me from any other white powder. It has no taste and it has no odor. It appears in counterfeit tablets, pills, gel capsules. It's made to mimic other drugs. It's sprinkled on marijuana. It can be put in general food. It can be hidden anywhere. Fentanyl powder has the power to kill with ingestion, inhalation, and skin absorption with just 2 milligrams. So, by comparison, a sweetener packet at a restaurant table has 1,000 milligrams in it. 2 milligrams is 2 grains of salt. That's enough to take a grown man and put him in the grave. You can't dose that properly outside of a pharmaceutical environment. I don't care how good you are. There are derivatives, other analogs of fentanyl, such as carfentanil, that they actually use in a veterinary setting to anesthetize elephants. That's how powerful it is. In the hospital, you have transdermal patches up here. It's given in an intravenous drip. There are pill forms, and then in combat zones, a lot of times they have the lozenges that they'll give to wounded soldiers while they're being medevaced out to a hospital. The illicit forms, we all have seen these M30 pills and some of these other pills that are made to look like oxys, and then the DEA bags of fentanyl that they picked off of a banana shipment or some other commercial container. I heard an interesting piece of intel the other day that the people who are making these pills, which are in our country, understand that that brand has been contaminated. That M30 pill that you all may have seen the sheriff hold up in her news, they know that has a bad connotation. So now they're making it look like Tylenol, Xanax, ecstasy. They make it so that it feels like when you see it, it feels safe. They're adjusting to the public perception out there as fast as that perception changes. So how does it get here? Illicit fentanyl and other synthetic opioids are manufactured clandestinely, mainly in China, but also we are seeing a great increase in Mexico, coming from Mexico. It comes to our shores on commercial shipping routes. It's disguised, hidden, put in with radios, pineapples, you name it, and it comes to our country. Once it's in our country, most of the pill manufacturing happens here. There are people with pill presses that are compounding their own pills, trying to dose that 2 milligram dose per pill, and then sending it off the supply chains. It arrives, we have the ability, everyone in here has the ability to get fentanyl shipped to you at your house through the US mail. Because it's such a small amount that needs to be shipped to you, it's very hard to screen that out of all of the volume of mail that gets handled in this country every day. The effects on the body, this is a central nervous system depressant. Onset, we're looking at about 5 minutes. Full onset is about 20 minutes. So our brains have opioid receptors in them. Our bodies produce natural hormones that bind to those receptors. The fentanyl, when it binds to those receptors, it causes a decrease in pain, which is why it's used as a painkiller, euphoria. But as it continues on, you have a decrease in level of consciousness, you have slowed breathing, and as you can see, if you have your level of consciousness goes down and your breathing goes down to a point where you are not in control of it anymore, and that will result in cardiac arrest and death. If you don't have the decreased breathing, but decreased level of consciousness, your breathing may stop because of a mechanical problem, meaning you're choking on your own vomit, or you're in a position where you can no longer keep an open airway. It happens very quickly, 2 milligrams. Obviously, there's some other things that happen that are factors in how fast that fentanyl will act on you. Victim size, opioid tolerance, and other metabolic factors, but the big takeaway is this visual. 1,000 milligrams of salt, that's a table salt packet, 2 grains in my hand. So to counteract the fentanyl or opioid overdose, there's Narcan and naloxone. You've all heard of this, and there's been a big push to get this out into the communities because it works. It goes into your brain and it knocks the opioid off that receptor, and it binds with that receptor in a stronger way than the opioid. The receptor likes Narcan more than it likes the opioid. And that reverses that central nervous system depressant that is happening in your body. We've already talked about this, but I want to continue to talk about it. Right here, what we're doing is a huge part of this, is getting the community out and involved, being able to answer questions and show ways that we can help combat this problem in our community. This is the biggest thing right here, is reject the notion that it can't happen to me and my family. It can. I have opioid addicts in my own family, and it's painful, and it happens to everybody, and we need to talk about it, and we need to call people out, and we need to get them the help that they need so that it doesn't become a bigger problem where it ends up where we're at their funeral. And I know I'm being blunt, but I see overdose deaths often. I already spoke about the speak up. We need the community as law enforcement. We need you. We need your statements. We need your help, and we need your trust. The other two things are keep any prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs locked up. That has been talked about already tonight. But even as a small kid, if your child has a runny nose and you're giving them some over-the-counter cough medicine, make sure that it's being explained why, so that they can start to form that culture from a very young age, and it doesn't turn into something down the road where they think that they can take this just because it gives me a warm feeling inside. And lastly, make sure that all of your extra drugs that are in your house are dropped off at those drug drop-off locations where they can be destroyed appropriately. Thank you, and this is Chief Michelle Bennett.
Thank you so much, Eric. Eric's one of our best detectives here. In the city of Sammamish, we've added a detective member to Eric's team to deal specifically with Sammamish drug issues. That person came on board on October 16th, so I'm very happy to announce that with the help of City Council and our city manager. Thank you so much. I have 1 minute and 52 seconds, so I'm going to be quick. So some of the things we're seeing with juveniles, we have a Healthy Community Coalition here in Sammamish, and we did a youth panel, and we brought kids in, and the panel asked kids questions. So tell me what you're stressed about now. When I was in school, it's peer pressure, dating, and whatever else. It was fascinating to me that these Sammamish youth, what they were most stressed about was disappointing their parents and getting into a good college. That was their biggest stressor. And I just thought, gosh, that morning I told my son, you got a B? What is wrong with you? Right? We get so focused on their achievement and how well they're doing that we forget that they're kids. And we get them so over-involved. I have 4 children, and I think from the time they wake up till the time they go to bed, I want them doing something. And sometimes, you know what, they just want to lay there and do nothing. I have a 15-year-old right now that's showing me that on a daily basis. So what are some things we can do? What we can do is, we say be involved in their lives. What does that mean? Well, what I've found with kids working in the last 29 years here in the sheriff's office is kids need a purpose. And without a purpose, they flounder. So getting kids involved with sports. We have a Youth Explorer program. My son is in Issaquah School District. He's in the ROTC program. We have him now in Civil Air Patrol. I know I'm overburdening him a little bit, so I might have to cut back. But he has a purpose of things that he can do on a daily basis. And monitor their friends, see what they're doing. And if my son earlier this year was like, I hate my chemistry teacher, he's evil. And then he looks at me and goes, can you take care of him, Mom? I said, son, it doesn't work that way. So we had to have a whole discussion about that as well. But had to ask him, well, why are you upset? You know, what's going on? So he told me everything, and some of the stuff didn't sound quite appropriate. And I was afraid to contact the teacher because I didn't want to be that parent. And I actually talked to Harlan Gallagher, he's here somewhere. He's like, call the school, talk to them. Figure out what's going on. Maybe he needs to be in a different class because he's stressed out. And that was so important for me to hear because I don't want to be, you know, a helicopter parent or a lawnmower parent. You know, I mean, it's easy to turn into that, but I also want to take an active interest in my children's well-being. And you can do that as a parent. That is your right. So the last things I want to say are when Eric was talking about Drug Take Back, this Saturday, November 9th, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at Sammamish City Hall, we are opening our doors on Saturday for you to bring, we'll have an officer standing by the entire day for you to bring your drugs in. Any over-the-counter medication, anything you have a flyer. There's a flyer too. Thank you so much for making that. So please bring those things in. A lot of times it's hard to Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 because you're working, but we're opening Saturday for that specific purpose. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Greg Rudolph. Dr. Greg Rudolph is a physician with Swedish Hospital. I think I got that right, correct? And he's going to talk a little bit about some of the effects of drugs on our youth. Thank you so much.
How y'all doing? We okay? Hanging in there Thursday evening? I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you guys tonight. I do not live or practice medicine in the community here, but I do see patients down in Seattle, Swedish, who come from out here. I feel like I have a lot of contacts in this community. I actually was out here giving a presentation at Skyline about 3 years ago. Did any of you happen to be there? It was on a community, Jerry was there. And so, yeah, I mean, heartbreaking what happened. But I want to, you know, I'm an addiction medicine specialist, physician. I'm board certified in addiction medicine. It is a branch of medicine you can pursue. I also do pain medicine, and my primary practice is in Swedish Pain Services in downtown. But you know, I look at pain management from the standpoint of an addiction specialist, and this whole thing with opioids started with prescription, with overprescribing that happened for a lot of years, and built up a lot of people depending on opioids, and opened the door for people coming in with heroin and other substances that were cheaper and easier to get, and that's how we got to where we are now with fentanyl. But I want to sound a positive note here because you've heard a lot already, a lot of sobering information, so to speak. I see a lot of people do very well coming to get help, and we have tools to treat addiction and prevent addiction as well. And I want to share that with you because what I do is gratifying, and I'm sure those of you who work in the field would say the same thing. And there's a lot of positivity that can come from proactive addressing of these problems. So with that, you've already heard about the role of parents and proactive participation in your kids' lives. I don't need to spend more time on that, but there is a website with some nice information. It's a Washington State kind of a how-to on how to improve your skills bonding with your kids. And get into conversations with them that facilitate better communication, and also monitoring and knowing, you know, kind of who your kids are hanging around with, what they're doing with their time, etc. So others have talked about that already tonight. The other key thing, you know, takeaway point tonight is developing brains are different from adult brains, and development continues all the way up to about age 25. And so when we talk about substance use with our kids, we should be informing them that it isn't really a moral thing that we're saying, you know, you're not entitled to get a little feeling of euphoria from time to time. But we should be telling them you could potentially be harming your brain development. And that's true across all substances of abuse. Some things cause more harm than others, and of course more frequent and heavy use is worse than less. But you know, the answer to the question of how much substance use is safe, the answer is none. But you know, if you're going to do it, it's as little as possible and benign as substance as possible. And that's a little bit different from the just say no type of language from many years ago. But it is emphasizing that substance use is harmful to a developing brain. Regarding vaping, the term epidemic is appropriate to use, and you've seen on Jerry's graphs the spiking levels. And the fact of we have 4 times more 10th graders vaping now than smoking cigarettes as of last year's data. And you may be aware that in our state, Governor Inslee just weeks ago passed an emergency order to ban all flavored vaping products from sale in Washington State. We have not had any documented deaths from vaping due to respiratory illness yet, but I think it was the right move to have that emergency decree before we have deaths, because really we don't know what is the chemical explanation for those severe illnesses and deaths. And why is that? Because it's not an FDA-regulated industry. So those products have not gone through a vetting from a scientific standpoint. So right now they're off the market in Washington State, pending further analysis, scientific analysis, and of course legislative decision-making. But even without that very severe consequence of respiratory illness and death, the subject of vaping has been controversial for a while for those who have realized that we're introducing a lot of kids to nicotine, and they're using it at rates a lot higher than they would be if it were just cigarettes. And what's happening is they're getting addicted to nicotine. Nicotine is a very highly addictive chemical. So we have spiking rates of nicotine addiction coming along with vaping. We're also seeing kids using cannabis or marijuana probably more frequently than they would, because it's also part of the vaping culture. 21% of 10th graders who vape are using THC or marijuana through vaping. Jerry's house has a better sort of hands-on view of this, but just a picture of a kid with a vaping pen, and you can see it's pretty much indistinguishable from a regular pen. I can't do a much more thorough job than what you just heard from the detective on fentanyl as far as the potency. I really want to emphasize this point that even for people that have a tolerance to opioids, who assume that whatever they buy on the street they can tolerate just fine, they are dropping just as hard as people who've never used opioids before, and it's because of this super high potency opioid, the synthetic fentanyl. And so, even someone who's addicted to heroin makes a bad decision to use a pill or buys heroin thinking that it's not laced with fentanyl. And so it's not overstating at all to say that this is the worst time in history to buy substances from an unauthorized place, street, online, anywhere. If you don't get it from an actual pharmacy, you are taking your life in your hands. And I tell this to my patients, who are pain patients sometimes. It doesn't take a lot of imagination, when you work in the field of pain medicine. Somebody decides to, if they take their medicine a little too much and run out a day or two early, and they heard that somebody down the street sells oxycodone, and I'll just buy a few to get me through till my appointment. You just can't do that now. You wind up making an ultimate regrettable choice. So times have changed in this regard. And you heard about some of the demographics coming from China, moving from East Coast to West Coast. So we got it a little bit later out here than on the East Coast. You've seen the pictures, and the overdose deaths really have been spiking nationally as well as locally. So, and in the meantime, heroin and prescription opioid deaths have come down. Mexican drug traffickers are really focused on fentanyl, as you've heard. Why? It's the economics, of course, because it's cheaper to synthesize and it sells for a higher price. So that's why you're seeing a lot of drive from these traffickers to push fentanyl. Their profit margins are larger. I don't want to give short shrift to these other two substances, which are actually much more popularly used. Alcohol is still the most popular substance of abuse, and It plays a major role in all leading causes of teen mortality, which are injuries like motor vehicle accidents and suicides and homicides. So by no means benign. And I just wanted to point out the statistics of, we still have 1 in 5 10th graders who say they've used alcohol in the past month, and we have 1 in 10 that say they binge drank, which is defined as 5 drinks at one sitting within the past 2 weeks. So these are, it's not benign as far as concerned, although as a larger measure over 10 years, alcohol use has come down a bit. Marijuana use, we all thought was likely to increase when we legalized recreational marijuana a few years ago. The statistics haven't really borne that out. But what has changed is the perception of harm from youth as measured on these surveys, where a lot of youth assume that, well, it's legal, it can't be that bad for you. I do want to present a slide on what we know about facts of the effects of cannabis or marijuana. We know that it impairs learning and memory. Up to 8 IQ points have been shown to be lost on regular marijuana use from teenager ages into adult, even if you quit as an adult. We know it affects coordination, as in driving and sport performance, and we know that it impairs judgment, so you might make choices you wouldn't otherwise make that are risky to your health. Prescription painkillers, as I said, have been less of an issue in terms of overdose deaths, but certainly they're still out there, and we need to vigilantly safeguard. If you are somebody who has a pain condition and you have opioids around, keep them safe, keep them locked up, and bring back unused meds to these take-back programs and other safe drop-off places. Methamphetamine and cocaine are still out there and being used. The statistic is 5% of 12th graders as of last year in this King County community. And so we need to also be aware that fentanyl can show up in those. They're putting it in pretty much everything nowadays. So even people who are not expecting to get an opioid are getting a super high potency one. And last slide, just some of the things that you can turn to, or places you turn to for help. You guys have a really robust, and I'm really blown away by the amazing show of the array of support services that you have in this community, but there are some things here to be aware of. The National Institutes of Drug Abuse has a really nice website called, they have a family checkup section that you can look at, and talks about some of these talking points about how to interact better with your kids around substance use. And then I mentioned earlier the Start Talking Now website. Use your school counseling resources. Your primary care providers, believe me, they're getting a lot of education around opioid issues, and should at least know how to direct you if you have a trusted relationship with a pediatrician or family physician. And then people like myself who specialize in this, we're here to help as well, and we want to be of help to you. So I thank you for your attention. And let me introduce Sarah Young, who's a counselor at Friends of Youth.
And Christy Nicholson, who is the Director of School-Based Behavioral Health Services at Youth Eastside Services. You got the clicker? Okay, great. All right, so we are going to kind of team up and try to pull some of these things together with the emphasis kind of on parents and what parents can do. I'm gonna just kind of briefly run through here. I'm here tonight sort of hoping to share from 30 years of experience working with Youth Eastside Services, which provides a whole arena of services for mental health and substance abuse services. And on the plateau has counselors in the schools. And here you see our behavioral health support specialists in the schools and some of the things that they are doing there. And I'm also here speaking from perspective of a parent of a 23-year-old and as a human being who is as interested as every single other person in here of changing this dynamic and really wanting to encourage you as parents and to, I think, affirm how powerful you can be in changing the culture around these issues. Wrong way.
All right, so yeah, my name is Sarah Young. I work for Friends of Youth as a substance use disorder counselor. So we are going to kind of go over a few things about Friends of Youth. So we are part of the Garage, which is a teen cafe down in Issaquah. In that system, we put counselors in there, both mental health and substance use disorder. We as well offer a variety of services similar to YES. So we're going to start by going over the signs and symptoms of possible substance use. I do want to preface this, however. So while these are possible signs and symptoms of substance use, that does not mean that your kids are using, if they are using all of these things. Just because we're seeing these things, it's not a for sure, hard and fast rule. So I do kind of want to preface all of these things as we're going through them. Physical signs of substance use in your teens may be changes in eating habits. That could be both if they're overeating or undereating, just kind of seeing those changes in that eating in your home. Poor memory, if you're noticing that they're not memorizing as much stuff, if they're missing information, having to repeat information to them a lot. Again, kind of that missing pieces of time, having them kind of lose chunks of their day, not memorizing school, poor coordination, red, watery eyes, kind of those typical signs that we all looking for in teens who are using. Are they able to track what you're saying? Are their eyes watery? Are their eyes really, really red? And then shaky hands is another sign of use, so if their hands are constantly shaking. Behavioral signs of students who might be using, so seeing their grades drop at school, if you're seeing their performance drastically change, opening up those conversations about what might be going on, because it could be related to substance use. Loss of interest, a loss of distrust, so if you find that your students are constantly losing their trust, or you're not feeling like you can open up conversations and they're not being honest with you, that could be a sign that they're maybe holding something back or have something kind of underlying that they're not telling you. And a change in friend group, hiding their phone screen can kind of go hand in hand, right? So if they're not showing you their phone, if they're not telling you about who they're with, you don't really like the crowd they're hanging out with, possible social factors kind of going in there. Reasons for use could be a multitude of things. First and foremost, kids use out of curiosity, right? What is this? Kids are talking about it. I want to try it too. I don't want to be the kid that's not doing it. That's definitely a big key piece of why kids might be going in for reasons of use. Stress and mental health, as we've heard from previous presenters, the stress levels of students in the community are really, really high, right? The ability to achieve, how am I going to get to the right college? How am I going to make my parents happy? Those stress levels can really increase anxiety in teens, and so they're using as a way to cope with those feelings that they're having. Recreation, pleasure seeking, kids use because they think it's fun. So let's just put that out there now and say that that's another reason that they're going to do it, is because they think they're having a good time. Social pressure, so again, those friend groups, I want to fit in with what they're determining to be the cool kids. How do I make them see me the way I want them to see me? So not in their perception, they think that they're the only kid not doing it, but as we've heard previously as well, most kids aren't doing it, right? But they don't know that, and they don't realize that because they're surrounding themselves with the kids that are. So keeping that in mind. Availability, again, that could go with social. So older friends, older siblings, it's around and it's there. And then having an addiction or physical dependence is another reason that kids might be using. So if they have a genetic predisposition, if they're using, they're more likely to continue use because they do at this point have a physical dependence or an addiction to the substance that they are using, so they're not able to stop without help.
Right.
So.
And that's something really important to note, is that there is a high level of risk here, as I believe our doctor pointed out, with if you have someone who becomes addicted to an opioid, they're much more likely to take the risk of taking that pill than someone who isn't. And that just makes me think, when I look at this, all these reasons for use, they're really very similar in a lot of ways to what would lead adults to using, even something so benign as a cocktail. And kind of leads back to, we all need relief from pressures. We all need to feel like we're connected and we belong. If we have substance use disorder and addiction, we need appropriate medical and behavioral health treatment for that. So when I'm thinking about these, I'm always thinking about, okay, and so what do we do with that? What are the other ways that we can meet those needs for belonging or for fun or for excitement or for relaxation? What are the other ways that anxiety can be treated? What are the other ways that depression can be treated? What needs to happen if someone is addicted? What kind of climate, because Sarah and I were talking about this earlier, about needs to be created on the one hand that says it's perfectly acceptable not to use substances and to be leading a sober life, and that's the best decision for a young person to make because of brain development and other things. And there is no shame if you have made a mistake with something, if you've gotten caught up with something, or if you have an addiction or a substance use disorder. Young people need to know that there are safe adults and that they can go to their parents and not be punished, not be judged, not be shamed. Way back at, somewhere back there at the beginning, I remember someone saying, that parents, young people's major stressors were they wanted to disappoint their parents, and they were really worried about kind of their future and being successful, but they were very one-minded about what that success was going to look like. That's where we can make a change around this, right? We can help our young people see their value as whole human beings. That'll help them to know that failure is part of reaching success. Making mistakes are, important learning opportunities, that there are many, many ways to be successful and to do your best. And that if you need help, there is help available in your home and in your community. So very powerful pieces that you have kind of at your control. And something really important that we want everybody to know.
Yeah. So we're going to briefly go over the Good Samaritan law because it is important for those us in this community to know about and for you to go home and share with your students. So the Good Samaritan law means that if you or your students are in a situation in which someone is high, drunk, or overdosing, you can call 911 to receive help for that person, and no one in that situation will be in trouble. Even if they're underage, if they are also under the influence, you can call, the community can call and get that person help and get them the aid they need, and they will not be in trouble for calling and also being under the influence. So it protects those that are calling and encourages people to continue calling if they are in a situation in which there might be an overdose or someone's getting sick and they don't know what to do. They can call 911 and get the help they need in that situation. This law will save many lives if we're able to reach out and know that we are protected when we are calling. So.
And this law is something that's come about collectively because communities have come together with law enforcement, with government, and said, we need to create pathways for help and safety and to save lives in the same way. So it's one of our successes here. And as is the availability of the Narcan or naloxone and being able to get that to help save lives. So we're making progress on a lot of things. So I want people to feel like, well, let me start with this. How many people in the room feel at least a little anxiety after having heard all of what they've heard tonight, right? How many people might feel just downright scared, kind of thinking about the dangers and the risks that are out there, not only for their kids, but for the kids in the community that they care so much about, and we're all impacted by that, right? So my instructions to you are all to just right now, just take a whole big deep breath. Okay, so here in one hand, I want you holding all that information. It's really important that you have it. The more aware you are, the more you're talking with people about it, it is going to help save people's lives. I mean, just bottom line when we're talking about that fentanyl and the counterfeit opioids. And by knowing that information, you have a pathway to have a conversation with your children. You aren't kind of feeling like overwhelmed in the dark, duped. You're not going to be the one who somebody says, no, that's nothing, or no, what? Oh, no, that's not a this or that, that's this thing kind of thing. It's like, no, I kind of think that maybe that's a vape pen. Nope, I think it is. So we're going to need to do something about that, okay? So on the one hand, you have your information, you're empowered by that. On the other hand, you have your need and your ability to calm yourself. So this is like being on the airplane when they say put on your own oxygen mask first. Because if you don't take that deep breath, and if you don't find some kind of a center, you are not going to be able to talk to your kids in the way that you need to talk to them, to have these conversations and to share this information, to build the relationships, you've heard echoes of this all night long, right? About having that relationship with your child, having that flow, that dialogue, that conversation. In order to do that, you have to have yourself in hand first. You're not only the role model in how you deal with your own anxiety and your own stress. Do you take a walk or do you drink a cocktail? Do you invite your child along to go and see the funny movie and laugh? Or, do you sit down and make some popcorn at home or have a cup of tea? All right? So creating those opportunities, modeling those really small and simple ways. But you're not going to be able to do it if you can't do that for yourself first. If you don't get the level of help that you need, and if you don't communicate that we can be a helping culture. People can be successful, people can be awesome, people can be, and at the same time, people can be vulnerable. They can make mistakes. So you could role model, for example, if someone comes up to you and says, how are you doing today? Instead of saying, I am great. Oh, my kids, oh, they are great. Oh, do you know that they're on track for the Ivy League and this and that and everything? You say, oh, God, it was a really rough week in our house. So-and-so's, it's like you heard up here, not doing their homework, and I'm really frustrated about it, and that, let's let each other be imperfect. Let us be vulnerable with each other. Let us recreate that possibility for our children that they can tolerate making a mistake, not being perfect, not being the best, okay? So most of these points here I've talked about. You can read those. You've heard some of these other things already tonight as well, but I just want to kind of go back to them. And again, keeping in mind your two hands, right? The one where you're being knowledgeable, you're educating yourself, you know who those parents are, you know where your kid is, you're having the conversation. The other part where you're always keeping in mind, okay, gotta find my center, take a deep breath. Okay, I'm back kind of where I can be. I might be freaking out in the back of my mind, but right now what I'm saying to you is, I learned some interesting stuff today about kind of this fentanyl that's out there that, the police were saying no drugs that you're buying illegally are safe at all. Wow, have you heard about that? What do you know about that? Let's talk about that. So, because if you are too fearful, you're going to do a couple of different things that aren't going to work. One is you're going to pursue, tell me more, I want to know. Well, what do people do when somebody comes at them that way? They leave, right? They shut down. Or you're going to say, this is the way it's going to be, and these are the rules, and da-da-da-da-da. And what are you going to get? You're going to get resistance, and you're going to get arguments, or you're going to get kind of sneaky rebellions. So we want to find that middle path, and that middle path is listening and keeping your center. And then also, if you think something's wrong, if you're seeing the things that Sarah had talked about before, you notice those, you trust your instincts. You don't let somebody say, oh, nothing's wrong. You say, no, I think there's a concern here, and we're going to follow up on it, and we're going to get more information. We're going to get help and support. We're going to talk to the doctor. We're going to go to counseling. We're going to get an assessment. We're going to take that next step. And you're going to continue to feel free to say, in our family, we value sobriety. We value life. I think you have a great future ahead of you, whether you get that perfect score, you get into that college or that, there's a path for you. You're going to find your way to give to the world. And I believe in you, and because of that, I don't want you using drugs. Not any of them. Not the alcohol, not the marijuana, not that. All right? And if you are, there's going to be a consequence. Okay? It's going to be a reasonable consequence. And if you have a serious problem with it, well, we're going to get you the help that you need, just like if you had another illness. So again, information, deep breath. Ooh, got my center. All right, driving along in the carpool. All right, listening, what's saying, where's my opportunity to have that conversation? And I think we're going to finish up here with, correct? Oh, well, let's do quick little things about just levels of help. So again, this is thinking about, okay, maybe it's a little bit of a problem and you just, going to ask for some help at school or from your physician. Maybe you do need treatment. There's different kinds of treatment options that were involved here. That involves saying it's okay to ask for help, and that's a great thing to be demonstrating again for your kids. It's okay to ask for help. We all need help. That's how we have community, is by sharing and supporting each other, and each of us bringing our own talents and perspectives with each other. So medication-assisted treatment, so we have both, overdose reversal with the Narcan, but there are some other options around that are sometimes necessary with opioid addiction. There are ways you can find out more about that. There's partial hospitalization, there's intensive outpatient, there's residential. So you notice I kind of went from sort of the least to the most. And it just depends on what's going on. So that's where you're tuning in, your spidey sense that Jerry mentioned, where you're kind of having that conversation, you're finding out these things, you're not making assumptions, as Sarah said. We're not shaming, we're not blaming, we're just gonna find out what's going on and get the help that we need. Some more resources here, a couple of them the same as what you've seen before, and some of them are a little bit different. And I'm gonna repeat it one more time before Tom comes up and closes us out, but again, I want you holding that kind of information and the empowerment that comes from that, but then you're going to get that kind of fear and that anxiety, and then you're going to take that deep breath. So I've got this. I'm going to have that conversation. Thank you.
So I don't know about you, but I started feeling relaxed just hearing that. Take a deep breath. So I'm Tom Ehlers, and before I get started, I'm going to take 2 minutes to close, but I really would like to just ask for some acknowledgement and applause for our presenters and our resource providers that are here tonight. So I've been asked to do a quick little summary. I am a not lifelong, but a 20-year resident of Sammamish. My wife Maureen and I have raised our boys and put them through Eastlake and then the STEM school, Lake Washington School District. I'm going to review with you really quickly some thoughts on next steps. And before I do that, I want to talk as a parent. As I sit and listen, I am wondering to myself, now what? And you may be the same way, which is, what do I do now? And the truth is, there are a number of very specific steps you can take, but I'm gonna suggest you do one thing to start. And that is when you go home tonight and you see your kids, you give them a big old hug. And you tell them how much you care about them. Because we've heard from a number of presenters tonight, your kids may not tell you this, but in fact, you are all important to them from the perspective of they're going to listen to you a lot more than you might actually believe. So take that time and just give them a hug. And then the next thing is to find a way to get involved and understand what's going on with them. We heard a lot about the idea of having a conversation, and I can tell you personally, those first conversations with your kids are awkward. It's hard. I'm going to encourage you to have the awkward conversation where you start to understand what they're into, what their questions are, and there's a series of resources that Ray suggested to you in terms of use open-ended questions, get them talking, and no, it's going to feel awkward, but you're doing it for them. If you need some resource help to do that, get it. Start the awkward conversation. The other thing is be aware of changes in your child and what's going on in their life. Be an advocate for yourself and your kids. Seek help when you need it. So you may be sitting there feeling all alone. What I really want to communicate to you is, in fact, you're not alone. You saw resource providers ringing the room. You heard a ton about some really great resources that will be available online. you're not alone. And I have 4 specific things that I'm going to suggest you do. The first is up here, next slide. The first I'm going to suggest is there's actually some great, there's some literature on this, youth mental health for adults. And so there's actually a seminar you can go to Monday, November 18th. The flyers are over there, where you can begin to learn more about what youth are going through. If you can't make it on Monday, there's actually one on Saturday. So mental health, and then the other thing is there's actually peer-to-peer team support, which is on the other side of this flyer. So get involved, get engaged, and check it out. The second thing is, the reality is, we all go to the doctor, we get prescription drugs, we use them sort of, and we forget about them, right? Well, the reality is, those can sometimes be targets for your kids or your kids' friends or whatever. So there's actually a drug drop-off day that's scheduled for November 9th. It was mentioned earlier, but I encourage you to just bring any drugs that you no longer need, it doesn't matter, to drop them off. You know, one thing, and I said to my kids a bunch of times is, and they're kind of sick of hearing this, but my view is that kids need parents, and if kids didn't need parents, nature would have gotten rid of parents a long, long time ago. So it's hard, but we're here, we're not their best friend, and we have to take action on their behalf, yet they're growing into these little independent adults as well. But just know they need you more than they may be suggesting to you. The final 2 points are, if you have any questions at all, please fill out a comment card. And there's going to be a series of FAQs that will be presented on the City of Sammamish website. And then finally, check out the website. There's some really, really great resources. So in summary, you're not alone. Reach out for help. Thank you for being here, and thank you to all of our presenters tonight. Take care.